The real danger isn't chaos, it's comfort. It's the slow death that hides inside routine, the numbing predictability that feels safe, yet quietly consumes your edge. We think the threat comes from pain or heartbreak, but often it's from the small dependencies we no longer question. Not from what breaks us, but what makes us stop thinking altogether. Enter Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who looked at the face of the 20th century's greatest horrors and saw something most missed. Not monsters, not madness, but mediocrity. She called it the banality of evil, a phrase that shattered the comforting illusion that cruelty must look dramatic or insane. Arendt saw that evil could be performed by men in tidy suits, following orders, doing their jobs, thinking of nothing in particular. The horror wasn't in their hatred, it was in their emptiness. They had stopped thinking. To her, the true danger wasn't passion, but thoughtlessness. Not chaos, but habit. And this insight stretches far beyond politics. It reaches into the intimate, the personal, into the quiet dependencies that rule our daily lives. Because dependency, too, is banal. It doesn't begin with dramatic control or obsession. It begins with comfort, with repetition, with the quiet surrender of questioning. We think dependency is about addiction or emotional weakness, but Arendt would see it differently. She would say it's about the death of thought. When you depend too deeply on a lover, a job, or a routine, you hand over the responsibility of awareness. You no longer have to examine yourself because the pattern does it for you. You don't have to think about who you are or why you stay or what you're avoiding. You simply continue. This is what Arendt feared most, a life that runs on autopilot, unexamined, unchosen. A person who performs their roles without reflection slowly ceases to exist as an individual. And that's the quiet tragedy of dependency. It's not just emotional or social, it's existential. Dependency becomes a form of obedience, not to authority, but to comfort. And comfort left unchecked erases depth. You become less curious, less alive, less capable of real choice. In this sense, the banality in our lives isn't just in systems or governments. It's in relationships, in routines, in how we cling to what numbs us. We obey not because someone demands it, but because it's easier than awareness. We submit to our own inertia. Arendt's warning wasn't simply political, it was spiritual. She wasn't just describing evil, she was diagnosing forgetfulness. A forgetfulness of thought, of self, of aliveness. And if we listen closely, she's whispering something terrifying and true. You don't have to commit evil to lose yourself. You just have to stop thinking.
Dependency begins innocently, a text we wait for, a routine we repeat, a comfort we rely on to feel okay. But soon, that comfort becomes a cage. When we stop questioning our attachments, they begin to define us. We turn people into anchors, habits into rituals, and familiarity into identity. The mind dulls, the self contracts. Hannah Arendt wrote that the true danger in society isn't rage, it's thoughtlessness. That same danger lives in dependency. Not the passionate kind that fuels devotion, but the quiet, habitual kind that numbs awareness. Dependency thrives on predictability. It craves sameness. And sameness slowly suffocates vitality. You wake up next to the same person, have the same conversation, perform the same emotional choreography, and call it love. But beneath it all, resentment simmers. Because every unexamined dependency is a slow exchange, freedom traded for certainty. At first, dependency feels like safety. You no longer have to think, to choose, to face uncertainty. But over time, it becomes a script, one that writes itself even as your mind drifts away. And that's the paradox. Dependency begins with connection, but ends with disengagement. The lover who once inspired you now drains you, not because they changed, but because the relationship stopped evolving. The job you once loved becomes a prison. The habit that once calmed you now numbs you. Boredom becomes the new normal, and boredom, left unexamined, breeds resentment. Arendt's insight was that evil doesn't come from passion or even hatred. It comes from people who stop thinking, who perform their roles without awareness. And in our personal lives, dependency functions the same way, not as a crime, but as a kind of self-erasure. When you depend too deeply, you stop noticing yourself. Your edges blur. You lose the tension that makes you human, the inner dialogue, the questioning, the hunger. To stay alive in love, in work, in being, you must preserve that friction. Dependency erases friction. It replaces curiosity with routine, presence with autopilot, and truth with convenience. The tragedy is that we confuse dependency with love. But love, real love, breeds through choice, and choice requires consciousness. Without it, affection becomes obligation, connection becomes inertia, and safety becomes decay. The cure isn't to avoid closeness, it's to stay awake within it, to keep questioning, to keep seeing the person beside you as new, to stay intellectually alive, even inside routine. Because dependency isn't destroyed by distance, it's destroyed by awareness, by turning the ordinary back into something seen, examined, alive. You've probably felt it before, that quiet dullness that creeps in when a relationship stops challenging you. Not the heartbreak, not the chaos, but the numbness. The conversations sound the same, the gestures repeat. The spark that once pulled you in becomes routine, mechanical, expected. And yet, you stay. You tell yourself it's stability. You tell yourself peace is better than passion, that comfort is love's natural destination. But deep down, there's a strange discomfort, a subtle ache, a sense that something essential has gone missing, not from the relationship, but from you. You notice how your opinions soften to avoid conflict, how your hobbies fade because we don't do that anymore. You start checking your phone for validation, waiting for a text that determines how your day will feel. Your emotional climate starts depending on someone else's weather. At first it feels romantic, this merging, this harmony. But slowly you realize you're not in harmony, you're in habit. And habit can be the most seductive prison. There's no fight, no betrayal, nothing to point to, only the soft erosion of self through repetition. You stop asking, "Who am I becoming?" and start asking, "What do they think of me?" That's how dependency hides, not in neediness, but in normalcy. You tell yourself everything's fine. You don't feel extreme highs or lows anymore, and that seems like maturity. But Arendt would warn you, this is the danger, because the opposite of pain isn't peace, it's apathy. And apathy doesn't announce itself with drama. It slides in quietly, disguised as stability. You stop thinking deeply about your life, your needs, your future, because thinking might threaten the comfort you've built. And comfort, once it owns you, doesn't let go easily. You might even catch glimpses of resentment, a quiet bitterness toward your partner or toward yourself, though you can't say why. It's because some part of you remembers what it was like to be awake, alive, curious, free. But dependency teaches you to stay still. It rewards predictability and punishes awareness. And soon you begin to fear change more than dissatisfaction. That's how the banality takes hold, not through malice, but through surrender. You don't lose your freedom in one tragic moment. You lose it slowly, imperceptibly, each time you trade curiosity for comfort. And when you finally wake up, you realize the chains weren't forged by anyone else. They were woven, softly, by your own unthinking habits.
Here's the truth that almost no one tells you. Dependency doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like relief. When you finally find someone who soothes the ache, who listens, who fills the silence, your body exhales. Your mind whispers, "Finally, I can rest." That's how it begins. You build a rhythm around their presence. Their opinion becomes your compass, their validation, your pulse. You start aligning your emotional temperature with theirs. When they're happy, you feel safe. When they're distant, you panic. At first, it looks like connection, but underneath, it's a transfer of power, silent, invisible, and disguised as love. And this is what Hannah Arendt warned us about. The most dangerous evils in life don't arrive with fire or rage, but with quiet compliance. We surrender not because we're weak, but because it's easier. Easier to follow than to think. Easier to adapt than to confront. Easier to please than to question. Dependency isn't dramatic, it's dull. And dullness is its weapon. Because when things become routine, you stop thinking. You stop choosing. You stop asking, do I still want this? You just continue. Arendt called this the banality of evil, but in relationships, it becomes the banality of dependency. It's not the grand betrayals that numb your spirit. It's the 1,000 little moments when you abandon awareness, when you silence your intuition to keep the peace, when you laugh at something you don't find funny, or pretend not to notice a boundary being crossed, when you mistake comfort for love and silence for safety. You start confusing stillness with balance. You start mistaking detachment for peace. You start shrinking your world to fit the dimensions of what feels stable. But here's the paradox. What feels stable is often what's slowly eroding you. When everything is predictable, nothing grows. When there's no tension, there's no movement. And without movement, there's no life. Dependency pretends to protect you from chaos, but what it really protects you from is transformation. Because transformation requires discomfort. It requires questioning the systems you've built, both social and emotional. It means saying, maybe I've been living on autopilot. And autopilot, for the dependent, is sacred. It keeps you safe from the vertigo of freedom. But Arendt believed that to be human is to think deeply, independently, dangerously. To think is to resist, and to resist is to reclaim your aliveness. In relationships, that means daring to reintroduce uncertainty, not as recklessness, but as awareness. To ask, am I choosing this person today, or am I simply repeating yesterday? That question alone can awaken you from years of numb attachment. Because love, when stripped of awareness, becomes habit, and habit without thought becomes a slow form of decay. Dependency is the comfort of not thinking. And yet that same comfort is what drains love of its vitality. So the paradox is brutal. The thing that makes you feel safe may be the very thing keeping you small. And the love you think you're protecting by clinging to it
might be the one you're slowly killing by never letting it breathe. Dependency whispers, stay where you are. Don't think too hard. Freedom whispers, risk discomfort. It's the only way back to yourself. The real danger was never chaos. It was the slow death of unthinking routine. The moment you confuse peace with paralysis and devotion with dependency. That's when the dance stops. That's when love stops breathing. So, how do you escape the quiet gravity of dependency without swinging into cold detachment? The answer isn't isolation, it's awareness. Arendt never called for withdrawal from the world. She warned against unthinking participation in it. The goal isn't to reject love, but to wake up inside it. Start here. Observe your rituals. Not the grand gestures, the small ones. Who texts first in the morning? Who decides when you talk, when you rest, what you share, what you hold back? Where do you automatically say yes, even when you mean no? These micro-habits reveal who's thinking and who's just responding. Dependency thrives in automation. Respect, in contrast, is built through intention. Every time you pause before reacting, you reclaim a fraction of yourself. Every time you express an authentic thought, especially one that risks disapproval, you strengthen your intellectual spine. That's not confrontation, that's consciousness. Next, practice solitude without withdrawal. Dependency often makes you fear your own company because silence exposes the emptiness you've been avoiding. But solitude, properly held, is a recalibration. It's where you remember that your thoughts, your reflections, and your identity are yours, even when no one's affirming them. You don't need to cut people off to find balance. You just need to stop outsourcing your emotional weather. Let your peace come from alignment, not approval. Third, reclaim the habit of thinking. It sounds simple, but in relationships, thinking often feels dangerous because thought disrupts. It interrupts the smooth rhythm of dependency. It forces you to notice what doesn't fit. But thought is the immune system of the soul. Without it, anything can infect you. Someone's moods, someone's expectations, someone's version of who you should be. Arendt's point wasn't just political, it was deeply personal. When you stop reflecting, you stop choosing. When you stop choosing, you stop living. So make reflection a ritual. Ask yourself, did I agree today just to keep the peace? Did I speak honestly, or did I adjust myself to stay loved? What parts of me have gone quiet lately? Those questions aren't comfortable. They're clarifying. And clarity, though it feels lonely at first, is the birthplace of authentic connection. Finally, redefine love as collaboration, not consumption. Dependency treats relationships like emotional economies. You give so you can get. But conscious love doesn't trade. It shares. It allows both people to think, to disagree, to evolve. It leaves space for solitude inside connection, because real love respects difference as much as it cherishes union. The irony is, when you stop needing someone to complete you, they start seeing you more clearly. When you stop performing for affection, you become magnetic. Because awareness, not compliance, is what makes someone truly alive. Dependency's comfort will always whisper, "Stay." But consciousness replies, "Stay awake." And that simple shift from needing to knowing transforms love from a loop into a living thing again. At first,
breaking free from dependency feels like emptiness. You stop reaching for constant validation, and suddenly, the silence hits. It's the silence where your old reflexes used to live. The impulse to check the phone, the need to be understood, the habit of molding yourself into something palatable so love doesn't slip away. But stay in that silence long enough, and something begins to form. Not loneliness, clarity. You start hearing your own voice again, quiet but unmistakably yours. The one that asks, what do I actually believe? What do I want to create? Who am I when no one's watching? That voice is who dependency buried. And when it comes back, your entire posture toward life changes. You stop over-explaining. You stop managing other people's moods. You stop mistaking attention for intimacy. And the strangest thing happens. You become magnetic. Because people sense when you are centered, when you don't demand, when you don't cling, when you can hold tension without collapsing, they feel it. You become the calm in the storm, not the one swept away by it. This is what Arendt was really pointing toward. Not stoic isolation, but intellectual sovereignty. You move through the world awake. You notice the forces trying to lull you into automation. Social media, emotional drama, surface-level validation. And you simply opt out. You don't rebel loudly, you just stay conscious. Your relationships deepen because they're no longer driven by fear. You can love someone without losing shape. You can walk away without resentment, stay without surrender, and connect without control. It's not a performance anymore, it's participation. And the irony? You end up being more desirable, not because you chase less, but because you radiate peace. Because when someone looks at you now, they sense a person who won't collapse into them, a person with gravity. Dependency was never really about love. It was about survival. But now, you've outgrown survival. You've become someone who doesn't need to be chosen to feel complete. Someone who chooses, consciously, freely, and fully alive. That's the quiet power Arendt left us with. Not rebellion through noise, but freedom through thought. And when you start living from that place, respect stops being something you demand. It becomes the atmosphere you carry.
If this message hits somewhere deep, pause here for a second. Not to scroll, not to move on, but to breathe and feel that quiet shift inside you. That small awareness you felt while listening, that's the beginning of freedom. It's not dramatic, not loud. It's subtle, like a click in your perception. A moment where you realize you've been living half asleep, mistaking dependency for connection, comfort for love, repetition for depth. You don't need to burn your bridges or walk away from everyone to wake up. You just need to start noticing. Notice when you act out of fear. Notice when you shrink your voice. Notice when you confuse being needed with being valued. That's where it begins, with one conscious moment. If you're tired of being the one who gives everything until there's nothing left, if you're done mistaking emotional chaos for love stories, if you want to learn how to hold yourself with quiet authority, you're in the right place. Here, we don't chase noise. We study the mind beneath it. We turn patterns into insight, pain into awareness, dependency into dignity. So, if this resonated, share it with someone who's ready to wake up too, because awareness spreads quietly, one mind at a time.